Thanks so much for having us today. My name is Matt Stern. I work for the City of Chicago Department of Housing. Let me just jump ahead here to our faces. There we go. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Chicago Recovery Plan here at DOH, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as well.
Hi, good afternoon. Jim Horan, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Construction and Compliance Bureau with the Department of Housing. We handle construction, design, construction management. We're through construction obligations with your minority and women business enterprise participation and your wages associated with the city funds. And we also do long-term monitoring of affordable units as well. Thank you.
Hi folks, good afternoon. Gavin with the City of Chicago Office of Climate and Environmental Equity. Really happy to be here with you all. I mainly work on our building decarbonization policy and help support some of our Chicago Recovery Plan projects with my amazing partners at DOH, among many others. I'm jumping straight in, right? Wonderful. All right, straight into the presentation. So quickly for the agenda today. First, we're going to take some time to go over the big picture context for buildings, emissions, climate change, and the intersections therein. So I'll explain that in a moment in the next couple slides. Then we're going to really dive into what DOH is doing specifically, our Department of Housing, as it relates to buildings, decarbonization, and aligning DOH's policy priorities and their program priorities with our climate action plan, and talk really about the implementation of some really exciting programs that align with our climate change goals in the city of Chicago. And then finally, we're going to dive into some of the implementation of our Chicago Recovery Plan and look at what happens when we are taking our dollars and really aligning them with our values and implementing some really exciting programs that Matt will talk about a little bit later. Wonderful. Okay, so first, for a little bit of context, I'm going to do my best to have this memorized, but I might need to walk over in a moment. But these two images here explain the greenhouse gas footprints, both at the United States, kind of the national level, and then what our footprint looks like in the city of Chicago. On the left-hand side, you can see the U.S. greenhouse gas footprint profile. I believe that little highlighted section in the red box shows the commercial and residential breakdown of, thank you so much, appreciate it, according to the emissions that they produce. So that little piece of the pie right there, 13%. We're talking around a tenth of total emissions are produced nationwide on average by buildings, both the fossil gas that they are burning and by the electricity that they consume and what is generating those electrons to get to those buildings. Now, let's flip that over to the Chicago context on the right-hand side. 69% of our emissions profile comes from our built environment. This is a dramatically higher number, obviously, than the national average. And when you compare it to our peer cities, this is also much higher. And this is due to a lot of factors, but one of them is for our high reliance on fossil gas in buildings burning for heat and for cooking. It does ramp up our emissions profile from our built environment. And because we have such bold and ambitious climate action plan goals related to decarbonization, this is one of really the critical sectors for us to address in order to decarbonize our economy. So, touch on this briefly. Why decarbonize Chicago's buildings? First, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we have a new climate action plan that came out in 2022. That plan calls for a 62% reduction in carbon emissions by 2040. In order to improve the health, safety, livability, comfort of our buildings in the city of Chicago, we believe that decarbonizing those buildings and really encouraging energy efficient electrification is a really, really critical step. And then finally, so many Chicagoans right now are dealing with the kind of really high burden of energy poverty. There are so many folks in the city who are struggling, day to day to pay for their bills, and utility burden is really of critical concern. And some of these proposals that we're working on and some of the projects that will be explained in a little bit have shown some really promising potential to reduce energy burden. And then finally, between the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in financing. That financing will be captured by the people who are best kind of positioned to capture it, and they will develop and catalyze new workforces, do new retraining, and build new green economies. We are committed to doing that here by aligning both the implementation of exciting projects with policy. I've talked a bit about the kind of Chicago context here. So I will skip this section here because it was really more about the slide previously. But I want to quickly dive into the policies, programs, and commitments that the City of Chicago currently adheres to and what we're working on, and then we'll transition into the implementation that DOH is going to speak to. So in the City of Chicago, we have a series of policies, programs, and commitments that are related to buildings, emissions, and decarbonization. Currently, we have two really exciting policies that are live. The first being our energy benchmarking ordinance. This ordinance was passed in 2013. It requires the submission of energy use data from buildings over 50,000 square feet in the City of Chicago to the city so that we can collect, monitor it, we can assess it, and then release it publicly so that folks can track what's going on with some of our largest energy consumers. And then secondly, we have our new energy code, the Energy Transformation Code. This new code, which is modeled on the 2021 IECC, it represents an 8.9% reduction in GHG emissions compared to the 2018 code, a really exciting policy achievement that over time actually reduces the cost of someone's mortgage based on the energy savings that are embedded in that code and its energy standards. For programs, our flagship building decarbonization program right now, but it will change soon with some of the work at DOH, is Retrofit Chicago. This is our voluntary building retrofit program. Currently, we have over 90 buildings that are enrolled in Retrofit Chicago and are going through voluntary building retrofits. Some of them have already achieved 35% energy efficiency improvements and carbon reductions through that program. We're looking to expand this, but it's been a really critical way that we can show the public and show the development community specifically how this work done on a voluntary basis is already driving returns for them. And it's helped inform a lot of our policies and the work that we'll talk about later. And then finally, for our plans and commitments, give me a moment. So, number one was passing the 2022 Climate Action Plan, which I already described. Secondly was releasing this Building Decarbonization Working Group report. We brought together a group of 53 critical stakeholders across the city, a combination of developers, labor advocates, frontline leaders, folks who are in the real estate industry, folks who work for utilities. We brought them into one room and decided what would be a really feasible and approachable type of trajectory for building decarbonization in the City of Chicago. That report is live and it's helping inform a lot of our policies and programs right now. And then two of our future commitments, we are working right now to pass a building decarbonization ordinance for new construction, and then finally working to develop a building performance standard to set performance targets for the largest buildings in the City of Chicago. And that is our current landscape of policies, programs, commitments as they're related to building decarbonization. And now I am very excited to turn it over to my colleagues at DOH to talk a little bit more about implementation of some of the really exciting work.
Thank you, Gavin. To the right. Okay, thanks. Hi, good afternoon. So this is where Department of Housing is working toward moving some of these policies into outcomes. So in alignment with the Chicago's 2022 Climate Action Plan, and in recognition that the climate crisis places a disproportionate burden on low-income residents and communities of color, the Department of Housing has an Architectural and Technical Standards Manual that now includes new baseline requirements for all construction funded by the Department of Housing. These requirements are intended to increase energy efficiency, reduce utility bills and operating costs for tenants and building owners, reduce the city's overall carbon emissions, reduce pollution, increase air quality, and support the decarbonization of Chicago's residential building stock. sorry, the text is a little warped there, sorry. I'm going to walk through what some of these instruments that we have and how we're leveraging them. So DOH has a funding round for low-income housing tax credits and other funds for the multifamily affordable housing projects. We have those rounds every 2 years. The process is governed by the Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP. The QAP sets rules and helps DOH direct federal affordable housing funds where they're needed most. The QAP is required by the IRS for the allocating agency. In conjunction with the publication of the QAP, we also have our Architectural and Technical Standards Manual. We did publish that to be predictable and transparent back in 2019, revised it in 2021, excuse me, and in 2023, we've now added some baseline standards. So these memorialize the city requirements that developers, architects, and the general contractors need to follow, and it's a very predictable and transparent manner. So in the new construction arena, residential units and residential common spaces must be all electric, no tenant gas hookups. Development must also be all electric ready. This means all building electrical service shall be sized large enough to accommodate all electrical appliances, and physical building design provides sufficient space and capacity for all electric systems. So if you're replacing your gas-fired building hot water system in the future, it needs to be set up for electric in the future. All building utilities and appliances shall be electric where the technology to do so is efficiently and cost-effectively exists and it's readily available. So for our rehab, we do a physical needs assessment, and along with that, now we're requiring an energy audit that needs to be ISO or ASHRAE, following those standards, and needs to be conducted by a third-party entity. Within the outcome of that, we look to make sure that certain areas are being implemented, such as electrical work, making sure that the building electrical service upgrade or replacement is sized and able to accommodate all electric appliances in the building systems, whether now or also potentially in the future. All perimeter building envelope work shall include insulation and air sealing to the highest possible R value within a reasonable cost. We also strongly encourage developers to consider all ways to advance additional energy efficiency and decarbonization goals into their rehabilitation scopes. We also reserve the right in our negotiations to require developers to implement particular design elements based on the review of the P&A and the energy audit and their proposed project scope and design. We also have a preference, so back to the qualified allocation plan, I don't want to really go into that, so that's its own animal, but there's typically tracks, but there is no track for our preference for decarbonization, but there is a preference. So if your submission comes in and with your application and it's exceeding our standards for our baseline, such as achieving, a couple of different areas we're looking at is innovative building practices that substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the building life cycle. Above code insulation and energy efficiency measures that take meaningful steps toward a net zero energy use building, and then on-site renewable energy generation and storage, and also mitigation of flood and extreme heat, if any of those items come out of the energy audit for that particular property, and then backup power sources. The benchmarking program. So Gavin talked a little bit about the ordinance and such with the benchmarking. Now with either rehab or new construction, we're requiring energy benchmarking beyond just the 50,000 square foot building. So starting in 2023, any developer that's receiving any city funding for Department of Housing funded development of 10,000 square feet or larger within the development, we're requiring energy benchmarking. So again, this is for both new construction and rehab. This is annual reporting of the energy use, and the data verification is required every 3 years. The city and its not-for-profit implementation partner for the benchmarking program will provide training, guidance, and some technical support to aid the building owners in this effort. And a little statistic here that buildings in the benchmarking program since 2016 to 2021 have reduced the emissions by 37%. Now switch it over to Matt. I'm sorry, that is an Invest Southwest project. So it does not exist yet. This is a rendering of it, yeah.
Great. So the preferences and requirements that Jim talked about are great. They're a crucial first step, as are the some of the larger policy frameworks that Gavin spoke about. But we know that that's not enough, right? I imagine we've all faced this in our own ways in our own sectors. There's a need to do green sustainable building, but the knowledge to do so within our fields, the expertise, the case studies, the examples of works completed and the outcomes that they've produced, they don't often exist nearly as much as we want them to. That's certainly true within the housing and especially within the affordable housing development space here in the city of Chicago. And there's frankly just a relatively low appetite for risk for trying new things, especially when funding for these projects is so tight. And so I am, my role as implementing the Chicago Recovery Plan is a, whoa. So my role is to implement the Chicago Recovery Plan for the Department of Housing. The Chicago Recovery Plan is a $1 billion plus COVID era investment in the city of Chicago that includes funding for a wide variety of both sort of short-term operational expenses as well as long-term capital investments in our city, including substantially into affordable housing and substantially into climate readiness, climate change, decarbonization, and sustainable buildings. And so we get to not only require and start to mandate some of the things that Jim was talking about, but we also get to put some money behind it and to really help our development community jump into this space and move into this space. And so I'm going to talk about a few examples of that today. The first is C40 is the global coalition of mayors committed to fighting climate change. It has existed since 2005. The city of Chicago has been a member of the coalition since 2005. And in 2018, C40 sponsored an international competition that was known as Reinventing Cities. This was way back under the administration of Mayor Emanuel. DOH and DPD participated in this competition, putting forth a number of sites where we would accept and consider proposals, seeking a bidder who would put forth a housing and neighborhood revitalization proposal that addressed some of C40's challenges for climate. Those include energy efficiency, climate resilience, sustainable water management, energy production, innovative architecture, so on and so forth. We ended up selecting a proposal put forth by the affordable housing developer POA with Perkins and Will, Skender, and others for 10 vacant city-owned parcels in the west side community of East Garfield Park. This project became known as Garfield Green. It is a two-building passive house development, the first phase of which is a 43-unit all-electric building with ground floor commercial space that is affordably priced for community and neighborhood businesses. The design already has a passive house design certification, and the building will be pursuing the FIAS core certification upon construction. The design implements a wide variety of the very technologies that we all know we need to be incorporating into our building stock. But again, at least here in Chicago and the Midwest, examples of doing so are relatively few and far between. This includes VRF heat pump HVAC systems, extensive high-end insulation, triple pane windows, heat pump clothes dryers, as well as a 185-watt utility-connected solar array on the roof of the building. We're incredibly excited to say that 2 weeks ago, this project closed. The contracts are signed. Construction will be getting underway remarkably soon. We're hoping to have a groundbreaking in the near-term future. And this project would not have been doable without substantial financial support from the city of Chicago, including, among other sources, an interest-free 30-year loan with Chicago Recovery Plan funds that helped close the gap and make the sustainable features of this building possible. New construction is not easy, but it is also, within the sector, the relatively low-hanging fruit. The much bigger challenge has to do with our existing building stock. And the reality is, if you look down the road 20, 30, 40 years from now, the vast majority of our future building stock already exists today. So just solving this problem in new construction is not enough to get us to our carbon utility and emissions goals as a city. We need to make sure that we're investing in figuring out how to do this work in the existing building stock. And if we find challenges doing that in the new space, that is nothing like the challenges we face in 30-year-old, 50-year-old, 100-year-old buildings. We are lucky to have Chicago Recovery Plan funding to support a relatively small pilot for retrofitting these existing buildings to bring them into this decarbonized space. $6 million is a pittance for what we need to be doing in this space, but it's enough to get started. And what we're doing is we're aiming to find one large, one medium-sized, and one small affordable housing building within the city of Chicago, all existing structures that were not ever designed with decarbonization in mind, and to capture an existing rehabilitation that needs to be ongoing in that building, layering additional funds to make that rehabilitation a climate retrofit. Our goal is complete electrification of HVAC systems, substantial addition of insulation, air sealing, new windows, new doors, etc., as well as electrification of plug loads like stoves, clothes dryers, etc., and where it makes sense, renewable energy such as rooftop solar as well. Hopefully, in addition to supporting these three projects, we will also be bringing on an evaluator to write these up, right? Because three is nothing. We'll train a couple of contractors, we'll get a couple of developers familiar with this process, but we also want to really document the choices, the challenges, and the outcomes of these projects and share those with our wider affordable housing development community. All right. The last program that I want to talk about today is on our single family side, right? Multifamily housing is a huge part of the pie, but an even bigger slice of our building emissions pie is single family homes, a term that we use to refer sort of broadly to 1 to 4 unit homes all across the city of Chicago. We are weeks away from publishing a request for proposals to launch a brand new program, not something the city has ever done before, to support deep weatherization and decarbonization of owner-occupied single-family homes in the city of Chicago, specifically targeting low and moderate income homeowners who also reside in their 1 to 4 unit home. Our goals here are multiple. At its core, we are in pursuit of our climate action plan goals, seeking to reduce our overall emissions as a city. But we also recognize, as the Department of Housing, who works predominantly with folks at or below median income, and usually struggle with utility cost burden, housing cost burden, et cetera, that we also see benefits in lowering utility bills, providing low-income homeowners with the ability to cool their homes in the summer, which is something that often does not exist at present, improve indoor air quality by removing combustion from within the living space, jumpstart the ability of our single-family contracting community here in the city of Chicago to actually undertake this, right? Get HVAC contractors familiar with heat pumps and what it takes to install them. And then with the CRP, Chicago Recovery Plan funding that we have, support at least 200 to 300 homes across the city to be retrofitted, hopefully entirely hopefully enabling entire electrification of those buildings if the buildings are set up to allow it and the homeowner is interested. Building on that success and recognizing that the Inflation Reduction Act and other actions at the federal level are making additional funding available for this kind of program, our hope would then be to identify and roll this program into future funding sources once the Chicago Recovery Plan funding is gone. So that's some examples of one particular program, a new thing we're doing with renewable, with existing multifamily buildings, and something we hope to be doing very, very soon with single family buildings to round out our sort of landscape from policy to program and then to individual project implementation. We have a few minutes left. I know there's a break upcoming. I don't want to stand in the way of that, but if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them in the time that we have remaining. Thanks.